Welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping right in today because we're taking a builder's journey through the web. We're going to trace the exact path from a bare-bones HTML skeleton all the way to a fully styled CSS masterpiece. So let's dive into the structural and aesthetic layers that construct the modern web as we know it. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with the web skeleton, move into user interaction, add a touch of beauty, dig into page elements engineering, explore some really cool advanced techniques, and finally wrap up with the big question, what will you design next? All right, let's start with Section 1, the web skeleton HTML basics. Remember the old days of web design where you just have an endless confusing sea of generic div containers? Well, thankfully, we've moved way past that. Modern semantic HTML5 introduces clearly named logical tags, things like header, article, and footer. And this doesn't just make your code beautifully readable for you and other developers, it actually ensures that search engines and accessibility tools know exactly what each structural block actually does. It's an absolute game changer for building a solid foundation. Now, browsers naturally interpret these elements in two main ways, block and inline. Think of block elements like big, sturdy bricks. They aggressively take up the full width of the page, stacking right on top of each other. Inline elements, on the other hand, like a clickable link, are much more polite. They just sit neatly side by side and only take up the exact amount of space they absolutely need. Moving right along to Section 2, user interaction, forms and inputs. Forms are essentially the communication portals of the web. This is how we gather data. You've got your standard text boxes, secure passwords, multi-select checkboxes, and single-select radio buttons. But you can also drop in highly interactive tools, like dynamic color pickers that instantly generate hex codes for your users. But, simple throwing an input on a page isn't quite enough. We really need to control the user experience. This is where HTML attributes come in handy to protect vital data. Say you're building a profile page on a payment site. You can use the read-only attribute on an email address. The user can see it, they can even copy it, but they absolutely cannot change it. You can also enforce rules, like a minimum password length, or use autofocus so that the second a user loads the page, their cursor is already blinking in the exact search box you want them to use. So at this point, we have our solid interactive skeleton built. It functions perfectly, but let's be completely honest, it looks incredibly boring. So how do we actually turn this bare structural blueprint into a beautiful, engaging masterpiece? That brings us perfectly to Section 3, the touch of beauty, CSS basics. The absolute crucial point here is understanding this very simple yet powerful syntax. It all boils down to 3 quick steps. First, you grab an element using a selector. Next, you decide what you want to change about it by naming a property. And finally, you assign it a specific value. So, for example, you select a paragraph, you target its background color, and you set the value to blue. It's a direct command that instantly transforms your structural HTML. To actually place our newly styled elements correctly without them crashing into each other, we rely on the box model. Imagine every single element on your web page is trapped inside a physical box. You work outward from the core content, adding internal space, which we call padding. Then you wrap that entire thing in a visible or invisible border. And finally, you push it away from other neighboring elements using an external margin. Mastering this invisible geometry is exactly how you achieve perfectly spaced designs. Let's look at how these boxes interact in Section 4, Page Elements Engineering and Layout. Here is a really fascinating distinction to remember, the behavior of outlines versus borders. While a border actually increases the mathematical size of your element, meaning a 10-pixel border on a 300-pixel box literally makes it 320 pixels wide, an outline sits completely outside of the element. It doesn't disrupt your layout calculations or push other elements away at all. It's a purely visual layer. CSS gives us incredible power over element placement. By default, elements are static and just follow the normal document flow. But we can totally change the rules. You can use relative positioning to just nudge an element away from its normal spot, or absolute positioning, which rips an element completely out of the normal flow so you can place it exactly where you want. And then there's sticky positioning, which beautifully locks a navigation bar to the top of the screen at the exact moment a user scrolls down to it. Now, when it comes to modern web architecture, Flexbox is an absolute lifesaver. It completely eliminated the stress of the old mathematical float hacks. Flexbox handles the heavy lifting for you. It automatically calculates perfect spacing and aligns items flawlessly inside a container with just a handful of lines of code. Let's step it up a notch in Section 5, Advanced Techniques for Modern Design. Pseudo-classes are incredibly powerful tools. Think of them like invisible tripwires tied to user behavior. They allow you to style elements based on a specific state. For instance, you can use the hover state to change a button's color the split second a user's mouse glides over it, or use the focus state to highlight a text box the moment a user clicks inside it to start typing. It just makes the site feel alive and respond instantly to the user's presence. Building right on top of that, we have pseudo elements. With before and after, you can actually insert content into your page purely through your CSS without ever touching your HTML skeleton. You can draw arrows, add decorative quote marks, or create incredible design flair completely behind the scenes. This keeps your HTML beautifully clean while letting CSS handle all the heavy aesthetic lifting. Okay, quick aside, I absolutely love this debugging trick highlighted in our source material. If an empty element is wreaking havoc on your layout and you just can't find it, use the empty pseudo class and slap a massive 10-pixel solid red border on it. It instantly reveals exactly where that ghost container is hiding. It's so simple, but so effective. As your projects get bigger, keeping track of colors and sizes can become an absolute nightmare. This is exactly where CSS variables come in. Using them is literally like having a master control switch. You define a value once at the top of your document, let's say a primary brand color, and then reuse that variable everywhere. If a client suddenly decides they want their site's primary color changed from blue to green, you don't have to hunt down 50 different lines of code. You just update the variable once and it instantly changes across your entire project. But, as they say, with great power comes great responsibility. The sources give a really clear warning against overusing the important declaration. Think of important as a sledgehammer that violently forces a style to apply, regardless of the normal rules of CSS. If you're building a project from scratch and structuring your code properly, you should almost never need it. Relying on it is a sure sign of a weak foundation. And honestly, if you aren't careful, you will end up with a stack of 1,000 important flags just desperately trying to override your own messy code. Finally, we reach Section 6. What will you design next? You now hold the complete toolkit. You understand both the foundational blueprints of HTML and the aesthetic, responsive power of CSS. The web is essentially a blank canvas right now, just waiting for your specific vision and your logic to bring it to life, which leaves us with just one incredibly exciting question to focus on as we wrap up this explainer. Armed with all this knowledge, from the raw skeleton to the final masterpiece, what will you design next?